wasn't just rain. It was one of those mornings where life seemed to throw everything at you at once. Sophie dashed through the streets, clutching her worn-out bag like it carried her last chance. A passing car didn't slow down, and the splash wasn't just water. It was humiliation painted in mud. Still, she wiped her face, straightened her thrift store blazer, and marched into that glass tower. In that moment, she wasn't just a girl looking for a job. She was a real story waiting to be told. The receptionist barely looked up, her smirk saying more than words ever could.
Hello, I'm going to tell you this incredible story. Remember that to receive new stories like this, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell. Let's get to the rest of the story.
Sophie could feel every stare piercing through her as if she didn't belong, like dirt didn't just cover her clothes, it covered her dreams. But she kept walking, heels clicking against polished floors, louder than her fear. That's the thing about emotional stories. They begin where comfort ends. And Sophie was way past comfortable. She sat in the waiting room, surrounded by sleek suits and glossy resumes, feeling like an outsider in her own life. But deep down, she knew people remember courage more than credentials. As the minutes ticked by, she silently rehearsed her lines. Not her answers, but her truth. That's what touching stories are made of. Raw, unrehearsed moments of bravery. And Sophie, despite everything, was brave. When her name was called, she stood, not like someone who had just been humiliated, but like someone about to change her fate. There was a quiet strength in how she entered that room, even with mud on her skirt. The panel looked up, expecting apologies, maybe excuses, but Sophie gave them neither. Sometimes the strongest statement is silence wrapped in confidence. Her interviewers weren't prepared for what came next. Instead of nervous rambling, Sophie cracked a joke about starting her own fashion line, Mud Chic. The room chuckled. Just like that, she flipped the script. People love a good comeback, especially when it's real. And in that room, Sophie wasn't just another candidate. She was an emotional story in motion. What she lacked in polish, she made up for in presence. Her answers were honest, laced with a sarcasm that felt oddly refreshing. No masks, no desperate pretending. Just her in all her imperfect glory. And that, ironically, made her stand out more than any tailored suit could. The kind of authenticity that reminds you some people are unshakable, even when soaked. As she walked out of the interview, she had no idea she had just shaken the cold-hearted CEO. But something had shifted, even if she didn't feel it yet. That splash of mud, once a curse, was slowly turning into a badge of honor. Sometimes, your lowest moments are just the beginning of a higher calling. And Sophie's real story was only getting started. Victor watched from the corner of the lobby, impeccably dressed, posture sharp as glass. His eyes narrowed slightly when he saw the girl from earlier, the one his car had baptized in street water. But instead of stepping forward or offering an apology, he retreated into his armor of silence. To him, emotions were distractions, and vulnerability had no place in boardrooms. Yet something about her presence, it lingered. She was different, not in a loud, flashy way people often are when they try too hard, but in the quiet resistance of someone who's faced storms before. As she sat across from him during the interview, Victor expected a trembling mess. What he got instead was a steady gaze, a bold smirk, and answers that made him blink. Sophie didn't beg for the job. She challenged the room. The kind of defiance that births touching stories. When she cracked a sarcastic line about her muddy morning ritual, the HR assistant tried to hide her laugh. Victor didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted. He didn't just hear her words. He read between them. Beneath the dry wit, he saw someone who had nothing to lose and yet still gave everything. That's the power of a real story. It confronts you when you least expect it. For a man like Victor, trained to read numbers and results, Sophie was a glitch in the algorithm. She didn't fit the mold, and somehow, that intrigued him more. He was used to polished resumes, Ivy League accents, and people who said what he wanted to hear. Sophie, though, she threw curveballs and laughed at her own strikes. And that made her memorable. He didn't say much during the interview, just nodded, letting others handle the technicalities. But the way he observed her, it was surgical, as if he was studying not her qualifications, but the stories she wore on her sleeves. Victor had seen thousands of candidates. Only a handful stayed with him afterward. Sophie was about to join that rare list. As she left the room, he tapped his pen against the table, lost in thought. He wouldn't admit it then, but her presence had rattled him. Not because she was chaotic, but because she was genuine in a world that thrives on pretenses. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, wondering when was the last time someone surprised him like that. Her name echoed silently in his mind. Sometimes the most unforgettable people enter our lives through the side door. Muddy, loud, uninvited. And they leave footprints where we thought we'd never feel anything again. Victor didn't know it yet, but his cold routine had just been fractured. And that crack, it was only going to widen. Sophie sat on her tiny couch, nursing a cup of instant coffee when the phone rang. She expected a rejection, maybe even silence. What she heard instead made her jaw drop. You've been selected as Mr. Victor's personal assistant. For a moment, she thought it was a prank. But the HR voice on the line was too serious, too real. Just like her reaction, she didn't scream or cry. She just froze, phone in hand, heart sprinting in her chest. How could she, the muddy girl from the lobby, be chosen? Out of 100 polished, perfect applicants? That's the beauty of emotional stories. They flip expectations upside down. And right now, Sophie's life had just done a full 180 without warning. Across town, Victor explained his choice to a very skeptical HR team. She made me laugh, he said plainly. And she didn't crumble. It wasn't about grades or recommendations anymore. It was about presence. Real presence. The kind that lingers long after the moment has passed. He didn't need another yes person. He needed someone real. Sophie stared at the mirror, touching her reflection like it wasn't hers. The girl staring back looked the same, but everything around her had changed. A new job, a new world, and possibly a new version of herself waiting to be discovered. That moment, the disbelief, the joy, it's what touching stories thrive on. Because it's never just about the job, is it? Her friends didn't believe it either. You mean that Victor? The CEO? You're working for him. Sophie laughed, still processing. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about employment. It was a door, and not everyone gets second chances that arrive in the form of a phone call. She was going to walk through it, even if her legs trembled. Victor, for all his cold calculations, had taken a gamble. And in his own quiet way, he hoped it would pay off. He wasn't sure what it was about her, but something told him she wasn't done surprising him yet. Meanwhile, Sophie packed her thrift store wardrobe with dreams stitched between each seam. The real story was only beginning to unfold. Sometimes life hands you the key before you even realize there's a locked door. And as Sophie prepared for her first day, unaware of the tests ahead, her heart beat louder than fear. Because a new job doesn't just mean work, it means proving that you belong. And in a place like that, belonging was the hardest part. The office was glossy, cold, and way too quiet. Sophie's sneakers squeaked against marble floors as she walked in, feeling like a school kid in a royal palace. On her first day, she spilled coffee all over Victor's schedule, not the kind of grand entrance she hoped for. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he said, "Make sure the next one has sugar. Dry but oddly kind." That moment, pure emotional story. Every day brought new hiccups. She pressed the wrong elevator buttons, got lost in a maze of glass-walled meeting rooms, and once sent a group email intended for Victor to the entire company. But even in her messes, there was a strange rhythm forming. She learned fast, adapted even faster, and Victor noticed, even if he never said it out loud. But not everyone was impressed. Emma from finance raised an eyebrow too often. Daniel from PR laughed a little too hard at Sophie's mistakes. Whispers started, "Why her? Did she flirt her way in?" Office politics weren't new, but they stung just the same. Especially when someone like Emma made a point of accidentally locking Sophie out of a critical meeting. One day, Sophie found confidential papers mysteriously placed in her desk drawer, files she had no access to. Within minutes, the rumor mill exploded. She was accused of breaching protocol. Her heart pounded as she faced Victor, unsure of how much he believed. It was the cruel side of success. People don't just question your wins, they weaponize them. Victor, while outwardly calm, started looking deeper. He reviewed camera footage, whispered with HR, observed interactions from a distance. There was something in Sophie's eyes that didn't match guilt, just confusion and hurt. He'd seen liars. This wasn't it. And yet, trusting his gut would mean going against his team. Sophie felt the walls closing in. She didn't sign up for drama. She just wanted to prove herself. But maybe proving yourself meant navigating more than tasks. It meant surviving sabotage. And those are the kinds of touching stories people rarely tell. The quiet battles, the silent heartbreaks. Still, Sophie wasn't ready to give up. The storm was only beginning. And as she cleaned up her desk that day, wondering if it would be her last, a flicker of fire lit in her chest. She would fight, not with claws, but with competence. And that fight would lead her to something even she didn't see coming. When the accusation surfaced, Sophie didn't cry. She asked for 5 minutes in the boardroom and brought her own report to the table. It was strategic, sharp, and full of insights nobody had dared to speak aloud. Victor leaned forward, intrigued. By the end, even Emma had stopped chewing her pen. Sometimes redemption wears heels and carries spreadsheets. The fashion gala came like a wave. High stakes, public pressure, and everyone watching. Sophie was asked to coordinate it, perhaps as a test or a setup. On the big day, nothing went right. Missing models, power cuts, even a dress torn minutes before the runway. But Sophie kept moving, delegating like a general, solving problems before they turned into headlines. While others panicked, she improvised, borrowed a dress from a journalist, turned a backup intern into a last-minute model, spoke into the mic with confidence that silenced the noise. The event ended with applause so loud it echoed through Victor's ears. For the first time in years, he smiled in public. And this time, it wasn't forced. Backstage, Victor handed her a glass of champagne and said just 3 words, "You did it." Sophie looked at him, really looked, and realized she had earned more than applause. She had earned respect, and respect in that world, it was gold. It was oxygen. Her real story was evolving, page by page, through fire. Later, when the board asked about the success, Victor gave all credit to Sophie. Emma and Daniel watched in silence as the girl they once laughed at stood in the spotlight. Leadership isn't about titles. It's about holding your ground when the floor collapses beneath you. And Sophie stood taller than ever. That night, she walked home barefoot, heels in hand, laughing at the stars. She had come a long way from mud-splashed sidewalks. And yet, deep down, she knew this wasn't the final chapter. Because sometimes, the more you rise, the lonelier it gets at the top. It was the elevator's fault, or maybe fate's. But that brief breakdown, 2 people stuck in a steel box, became the most honest conversation either had had in years. Sophie spoke about her mother, who raised her alone, and Victor revealed a childhood buried under expectations and silence. For a moment, titles vanished. Just 2 souls talking, a rare, kind of emotional story. Later, at a formal dinner, Sophie misread Victor's invitation. She arrived dressed like a date, only to realize it was a networking event. Her face flushed, but Victor leaned in and said, "You still look like the only person worth talking to." She laughed, awkward but touched, and he meant it more than he could admit. They started having coffee meetings that weren't on the schedule. Victor, once known for cold detachment, now waited a little longer in the office just to ask Sophie how her day went. It wasn't romance, not yet, but something gentler, something unspoken, the kind of touching stories you feel before you name. Others noticed. Emma rolled her eyes. Daniel whispered, but Victor didn't care. Sophie challenged him, humanized him, made him laugh when he hadn't laughed in years. He found himself looking forward to their exchanges more than any deal or stock report. That's the magic of a real story. It rewrites your routine. One night, as they left a late meeting, their hands brushed. Just a second, just enough. Neither said anything, but the silence afterward was louder than any confession. Sophie lay awake that night, wondering if it was just kindness or something else. Meanwhile, Victor stared at the ceiling, wondering the same. Lines blurred. Work became something else. Softer, richer, and dangerous, too. Because falling for someone when power is involved? That's not just risky, it's explosive. But some connections, once sparked, are impossible to ignore. And this one had already caught fire. Still, both kept their distance for now. But the story wasn't done. Not even close.